Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to get started. Thank you. That's better. Hi, how is everyone? I hope you're doing well. Welcome to our session. I honestly don't remember the precise name of what we're here to talk about in terms of what's in the program, but the core of what we're here to discuss is the work that we're doing together, trying to understand the opportunity of mobile devices for people with disabilities in emerging markets. This came from a conversation that Pascal and I had a couple of years ago now when we were talking about the differences between social and medical models of accessibility and disability inclusion. And we realized that mobile devices are underutilized as assistive technology because of many concerns, everything from redirection or selling or how useful will they be. So we decided to do something about it and try to build some research. So Pascal, Kathy, and I, and Maxwel, we are here to share some early results of this work. The work has just begun in the last handful of months, and I'm really excited what we get to learn. As a quick introduction for myself, my name is Christopher. I lead accessibility and disability with Google. Pascal is the CEO of ATScale. Kathy is the managing director of GDI Hub. And Maxwel, we're with KMBTI. My dyslexia is breaking it. KBTI. Thank you. So, at a high level, and I'll pass it off very quickly. What's possible when you have a device that does many things is important. If you spend $50 for a magnifier, you get to magnify something. But if you get a telephone, you can go to school. You can start a hustle. You can watch YouTube and enjoy life. What we want to do is understand what opportunities there exist for mobile devices in terms of changing people's lives in emerging markets. And so with that, I'd like to pass to Pascal to talk about what we are actually doing.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here on the stage with Maxwel, Chris, and Kathy. And thank you for participating today. So my name is Pascal. I head up ATScale, the global partnership for assistive technology. Just a few words about who we are, and then I'll get to the actual project that we're doing together. ATScale is, as I said, a partnership that brings together a lot of relevant stakeholders that care about making assistive technology, ranging from eyeglasses to hearing aids to wheelchairs to prosthetics to digital devices like smartphones, more accessible in low and middle income countries. We're hosted by UNOPS, based in Geneva. And we really act as a fund, trying to pool resources that can then be strategically applied in one of three ways. We partner with countries in low and middle income countries to help strengthen their system, to enable better access to assistive technology. We work on global public goods to have a broader effect on all countries to fill gaps in evidence or in normative guidance or trying to make access deals with the private sector to get assistive technology at lower cost. And thirdly, we work to raise awareness and advocate for more resources towards assistive technology. And this particular project, I think, ticks all the boxes in terms of what we're interested in and what we're trying to do. Today, sadly, smartphones are not considered as assistive technology by most countries, governments, systems that are in place to support people with disabilities, but not only, also elderly populations and so forth. And principally because, right, they're seen as something that most people already have, and they're a consumer good. But that's not really the case, right? Especially in lower income countries where there still is a big digital divide. Yet we know that because smartphones are, sort of have a universal design, they reduce stigma, for example, and they also reduce cost of providing assistive technology. Smartphones can replace bespoke assistive devices, digital ones in particular. And of course, there's a lot of positive externalities with having a smartphone. So we really want to try, and this was the discussion that Chris and I had a while back, try to influence policy to get smartphones to be included as assistive technology, because many people cannot afford them. And it's not just the phone, right? It's also the data plans that come with it. And it's also the ability to use them. So the digital literacy that is required to make use of smartphones. What we need are accessible devices. What we need are, accessible operating systems, accessible software and apps, accessible content, and the digital skills. So through this study, what we're hoping to show, and we'll hear more about it in a bit, is we're trying to understand really how persons, in particular here, who have a visual or hearing impairment, actually use the mobile phones. We're trying to understand what resources are needed to enable effective use. We're also trying to understand what AT is replaced by smartphones. And last but not least, we're also trying to then think about how can we use the outcome of this study to promote sustainability of access and influence policy and financing options that could be put in place to allow this to happen. So very excited to hear the first kind of initial results. The project just started not long ago, right? So these are just initial findings, but you'll hear more from colleagues. Thank you.
So next we'd like to roll the video. And this will sort of help set the frame in terms of what's going on and how the results are coming in.
I am Felista Siombua Kasina. I teach at Thika Primary School for the Blind. I am a Kiswahili teacher.
My name is John Mwangi. I have been a student at Kenyatta University, pursuing a bachelor's degree in education, special needs education, specialization French and history.
When I want to send a message and I'm feeling it is taking long, I used to depend on people, and it was a bit hectic to go looking for somebody to assist me sending, because sometimes I used to write, maybe in the process, if it's a long message, I make a mistake, I delete, then I go looking for assistant. But now sending a voice message or inquiring something from Google through talking, it has made me more independent.
The most helpful aspects of the training that I underwent last year were some things like how to navigate using a certain application known as Google Lookout, whereby I was taught how to navigate in my house with it, knowing what is on top of the table and also discovering the currencies. Google Lookout, it has been so helpful to me because I don't need to ask someone to read the currency for me, to assist me in identifying how much money is this. I can use the Google Lookout and try to discover the amount of money that I am holding, and also the color of the clothes that I am holding. For instance, I can put camera in front like this, and then Google Lookout, it will detect a white shirt or also a black coat.
Some of the changes that I have experienced is going to the Google, inquiring something by talking. That one has assisted me, like when I'm in class and I want to Google a pronunciation of a word, like when I'm teaching English, because I teach Kiswahili, but I still teach other subjects. There is the pronunciation of different words, especially words with ER and AR. Now, instead of going to search and it takes time, we just find the word in the Google and it tells us the right pronunciation. That is one of them. Another thing I have said about accessing my email, maybe when I want to read my payslip, it has brought up confidentiality because I don't have to engage somebody in reading my payslip.
A mobile assistive technology, it's so good. I think it's something that should be encouraged to, and especially to those people who are like me, who are visually impaired. You can make phone calls, you can communicate easily with people, you can text, and like computers, like the laptops, they're not that portable, so but mobile phone can be portable.
Now, like now, I can travel from here up to countryside without any sighted guide, because I can call a rider, take me to the vehicle, public transport or an Uber, go where I want, then come back. That is where we are. We are now very independent with technology. Where we are, it is very safe. It is very nice that somebody who is visually impaired can operate their own phone. You can do your transactions without involving anybody. You can read your WhatsApp messages. You can join different WhatsApp groups because you are not tiring anybody to read or answer, respond to any messages.
And for the record, Google did not pay them to say these nice things about our products.
I can confirm that Google had no editorial ability over that video. And actually, just the other day, you'll be pleased to know that there's lots of Google stuff being used, but also Microsoft Office being used. So it's an open access to many things. I'll just pull up the presentation, if it's okay, please. So I'm Kathy Holloway. I'm the academic director of the Global Disability Innovation Hub. I'm not sure I'm the managing director, but I'll happily take the promotion if people want to give it to me. I am a professor at University College London, and I like to investigate the development of new technologies and how technologies are adopted into markets. And mobile as assistive technology is something I've been following for a number of years. So before Christopher and Pascal came and approached us about this project, we had done a very small study, which I'll just quickly mention, because there was a guy called Mohammed, and Mohammed was a young visually impaired person who lives in Kibera, which is an informal settlement. And it's 2018, and GDI Hub had just started, and we had this massive program called Assistive Technology 2030, and it was our first big, massive program, and we were doing a small bit of research. And this young Muslim guy said to me, before we started the research, it was all about 5 people we interviewed, it was with KBTA, asking people how they use their mobile phone or what they use their mobile phone for. And before we started the research, he just looked at me and said, "May I ask you a question, please?" And I said, "Of course you can, yeah." He said, "What makes you different from everybody else?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, all of you come and you ask us questions, and you write reports, and you go away, and what changes?" And to this day, Mohammed sort of stays with me. I would love to see the guy again. But I often think, well, on any research project that comes across our desk, what is the point? Right? Like really, will it impact any change? And so when this came along, we thought, well, this is actually a chance to make that significant impact. Because somebody like Mohammed at the time was using a button phone, and we had no way to give him anything better than a button phone. He made peanut butter. And he was desperate to get onto Facebook and tell people about his peanut butter, but he couldn't tell anyone about his peanut butter. So he had 3 or 4 customers, and that was it. And you can imagine now he gets to be in touch with whomever he likes and also do many things. So when we first started this research, there was a question mark over would people use the phones. So as Pascal correctly says, we knew that they wouldn't use the phones unless people were properly trained on all the accessibility features of phones. And so we spent time developing with Google a curriculum and with KBTA adapting that curriculum to the local context. And that was rolled out, and it has worked very well. So literally people have had the phones a few weeks, and we're already seeing millions of usages. Lots of times that is social media, and I know that policymakers sometimes might think, well, why are people on social media? But as we all know, social media is many things. And so we have a series of qualitative research happening with our colleagues at KBTA, but also with our colleagues in India and our colleagues in Brazil. So we will have nearly 1,000 participants when the study finishes, 50% of whom will be hearing impaired and 50% of whom will be blind or partially sighted. We will have interviews with about 300 of those people, and about 50 to 60 people will be followed over a year. And it's our expectation that people will change how they use a phone as they learn to use more things, but also, hopefully, as their life opportunities increase by using the phone. So we've still got a long way to go. So even in the initial interviews, I mean, you heard some wonderful stories there from our participants, but we also realized that most speech-to-language models are based on English. Most of that model data has been collected in the United States of America, Canada, Europe. And so there's accent problems. People maybe don't pick up a Kenyan speaking English accurately, for example. We also have problems. We've discovered a lot of problems about acoustics in the environment and in these real-life environments, which are very loud, which cause problems. And obviously, people in Kenya don't particularly want to speak English. So we have a problem with language and trying to get regional languages onboarded and adapt to colloquial speech. But we've had some great feedback, so I'll quickly share some feedback from the participants in India, and then I'm going to hand over to my good friend and colleague Max from Kilimanjaro Blind Trust to talk a little bit more in depth about what we're finding in Kenya. I think in India there's been a massive sort of desire to explain how it's made people feel more equal. It's allowed people to feel like they can access things for themselves, and I think that came through in the video as well. And we're finding, because we've interacted in India with a number of people who are already training as groups in colleges to become teachers, that we're noticing how they're training each other, and the WhatsApp chats are immense. I'm learning stuff on this WhatsApp chat, so accessibility features that I didn't realize. So we're also sort of crowdsourcing that data. We're trying also to use a bit of those academics in the room, and more of an action research frame across the year, so that as we learn things, we adapt, maybe intervene with different interventions of digital skills to help people go that little bit further. And with that, I shall hand over to Max so he can tell you about the user training in Kenya. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. My name is Maxwel AJUOGA. I'm the Programs Manager at Kilimanjaro Blind Trust Africa. It's an honor to be here to also share our insights from Kenya based on our experience having been involved in this research right from the beginning. And it really aligns with our core mandate in trying to bridge the divide in terms of access to assistive devices for persons with disabilities in Africa. Of course, as my colleague Kathy has said, we are targeting both, the research was targeting both persons with visual impairment and those with hearing impairment at 50-50% each. And some of the actually insights that we were able to get from the participants, of course, and even before I get to that, is that we provided trainings to these individuals on how to use the accessibility features in these devices. Yes, so we provided training to these participants on how they can be able to use accessibility features in these devices. And then we are able now to, of course, observe over time and see how they're able to employ these accessibility features. And as you all know, well, you may not know, but mobile payment, for instance, in Kenya is a big thing. You want to board the public transport, you pay through a mobile phone. You want to send money to a loved one, it's always through mobile phone. Literally, one can spend an entire week without interacting with cash. So then as persons with visual impairment and those with hearing impairment who are involved in the study were keen to see how they can be, they can employ mobile phones as assistive technology to unlock some of the barriers that they have had for a very long time, especially when it comes to issues around privacy when they are making mobile payments. And this is something that even from the video that Pascal had showed us, you can already hear feedback from the participants saying that now they feel they have some level of confidentiality. Then also, we're also looking at, for instance, communication. How best can we then use mobile as an assistive technology to enable communication between different domains of disability? For instance, those with hearing impairment and those with visual impairment. And this also came in handy because then they were able to use caption calls to communicate to each other. Then also, one thing that this research did is that we are trying to ensure that we have participants across different domains. For instance, we had participants who are in business. We had participants who are students. We had teachers. You had a teacher giving feedback on how they are able to employ these accessibility features in teaching. There are those who are now employing those features in business. And they also participants, for example, who are more like content creators, and they're already giving feedback on how they can be able to employ these accessibility features to create content. And again, we live in a world where now advocacy is actually moving from, carrying placards and, and all that. And for instance, now there's power in having advocacy mostly being done online. And in Kenya, there's what we call the Kenyans on Twitter. Well, it's right now, it's X. And through that, actually, we've been able to, through the power of Kenyans on Twitter, we've been able to advocate for changes in policies. And now we can to also see how best we can ensure that even those with disability can be involved in advocacy through social media by employing accessibility features that are available in mobile phones. But then also looking at widely at policy level, how best we can be able to, of course, after the research, use this research to push for the government to ensure that even now, because of course in Kenya we import phones, there's a conversation to start assembling phones locally in Kenya with the current regime. But then even as that is coming, we hope that by the time that starts, this report will be out. Then now we can ensure that the government, even as they have conversation to start local assembling of phones, they are able to employ these standards to ensure that persons with disabilities are also able to benefit from these initiatives. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxwell. One of the interesting things that we've learned throughout the process is you don't know where the problems are going to exist. Naively, I assumed, since most of these smartphones are using Android, which is a highly accessible platform, that you could just pick any Android off the street and use it. But what we found, literally the day we were doing our training, is that sometimes they break it. So I'm not going to name any names, no naming and shaming, but this manufacturer that we had originally chosen had added a skin on top of the phone. And we got the phones the day before the training. I checked to make sure the features I knew were working, but it wasn't until that morning when we turned on TalkBack, which is the screen reader for Android, did we realize that this skin that this manufacturer had added to the phone, broke the camera, broke the contacts. So I went into this with a set of assumptions. Google thought, if it's Android, you're fine. We learned it's not. So by having these conversations, by doing this research, we identify where the problems are, and this gives us an opportunity to try to push for solutions that really help everybody. So we've already learned really interesting things even before getting started that could really have a profound impact. And for me, that's the exciting thing about this kind of collaboration, where we have private and public partnership coming together with experts in education, identifying where the problems are so we can solve them holistically. Because just having a phone with no training isn't going to do you any good. Having a phone that isn't accessible because someone accidentally broke it isn't going to do any good. Only by bringing all of these things together can we have a solution that really meets the needs of zero barriers for anyone. Pascal, do you want to talk about, or that was what I wanted to say, but given that we've sort of had 4 sets of talks, I wanted to give us a chance to talk amongst ourselves, and you get to participate. So Pascal, do you want to say something?
It was just, again, about some of these learnings or things that we kind of suspected but are now becoming much more apparent. But it's also this issue of the language and the fact that there are not that many languages available with many of these apps. And so one of the things that we're also now doing is trying to make sure that we have more of these languages. So for example, this year we worked with UNICEF to add Kazakh for text-to-speech functionality, and we're going to be working on South Vietnamese and Siswana, which is a language spoken in Southern Africa. So I think, you know, there's a lot of different pieces here that need to come together, and we need to find ways to accelerate that. I mean, we haven't spoken today about AI yet, but I do think that is also a huge opportunity in terms of, you know, the ability to adapt also to accents and things like that.
Is it, just to come in on the idea of product and training, so I think anybody who works in the more formal setting of assistive technology would agree with the WHO's definition that assistive technology is not just a product, but it's all the services that go into getting the product to people, right? So if I'm a wheelchair user, I need to learn how to use my wheelchair safely, transfer into outfit with that wheelchair, you know, pressure relief on my wheelchair, and potentially know how to get that repaired, know when I need an upgrade to my wheelchair or a downgrade, depending on which way my condition might be going. And yet sometimes, you know, I'm a professor in computer science, and I have so many people developing so many apps. I can't tell you how many people email me apps, new apps. And I speak to even just colleagues, friends of mine who are speech and language therapists saying, there's 900 apps. So which one do they help people with, right? There's 900 of them, and most of those are just in English. So it's almost, you know, easier if you don't speak English and maybe speak Spanish or Portuguese, you'll have potentially fewer to choose from. But when we were designing the training, it was really important to us that people get the phone, they get to learn how to use the phone at their own pace as well, because in different geographies, so for example, between Kenya and India and Brazil, people have had different educational experiences because of maybe the stigma within the societies, or potentially because of the geographies we're working in within those communities. And so some people might be able to absorb a lot of information in one day, and other people might only be able to absorb 1 hour of that information in one day, and what they need is then some remote assistance that works at their level so that they're able to then absorb and learn at their own pace. But so we've got this interesting challenge, if you like. So on the one hand, we're developing, as Christopher said, we're finding. Initially, that was a hilarious dash across Nairobi to a mall to buy some new phones that day when we were kicking off the project with like press there and, you know, the usual things. And we definitely tested the phones beforehand, and it was all definitely going to work. And then we got there, and it was just like button, 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 button. This is not going to work. So, you know, we've learned something about the hardware. How do we get the phone manufacturers to do a better job of not stripping out the accessibility features that were there in the first place? How do we make sure we get the training such that it's right for the person and it's right for the context? And then also, if I'm really honest, how do we get the data? So some of the data, we've installed an application on the mobile phone that will track your usage. Now, I don't know about you, but if I said to you, I'm going to install something on your phone and I'm going to track what you use your phone for, I mean, your immediate response would be, not sure, really not sure about that. So also just trying to explain to people who've never had a never had a smartphone before, what we're installing, what data we're collecting, where that data is securely being stored. And we don't know who they phone or what they watch on YouTube, or what we just know is the sort of aggregate. You've spent 2 hours on productivity apps, you've spent 3 hours on educational apps, you've used these accessibility features 50, 100 times, and then we have the interviews to go alongside making sense of that. So I think it's been an interesting case to try and explain that, get that not only in a way that it works for participants, but also works for ethics committees and things like that. So I think it's working very well as a partnership. And I hope that by the end of it, we will have insights not just on manufacturers and handsets, not only for policymakers, but also for designers, because a lot of the people who are designing the next generation of technology maybe don't realize that it's the onboarding process and the training process and the awareness. I mean, just because you have a phone doesn't mean you're aware of an application. And then if you're aware of an application, it doesn't mean you can afford the application. And then if you can afford the application, it doesn't mean you can afford to do the training and learn how to use it. And so all of those bits of the jigsaw have to be put into what is a mainstream bit of tech, which is different to when it was an augmented and assistive piece of communication device where some clinician helped me spend weeks learning to use it. So.
And that awareness issue is real. It's not just an issue within emerging markets. So many people I work with on a regular basis don't know about the applications that could help them today that exist on their phones, or how to use the tools that they already have in their pocket or their purse. So awareness is a problem around the world. Solving it for this context is even more difficult. We have about 10 minutes until we wanted to stop, so I wanted to open up the floor to questions for people in the room. Or, oh, sorry, please, Maxwel.
I just wanted to add that, because one of the observations that we also made was actually that we tried to diversify our data and tried to have some participants a few participants from the rural setup, and we realized that those from the rural setup, majority of them actually did not have access to smartphones, and neither did they know about accessibility features. And I agree with Chris that because those from the urban setup, especially in Nairobi, some of them had access to smartphones but never knew about the accessibility features that are available in these phones. So I think also there's need to be increased awareness, especially even with the manufacturers, so that as they sell the product, the buyers are able to know some of the features that they can be able to benefit from to facilitate their accessibility when they're using these devices. Yeah.
Thank you. And another interesting thing to think of is, as you get to know a tool like a smartphone, there's novelty. It's new and exciting, and you're gonna use it in a certain way, have certain expectations. But 6 to 9 months later, the profile is going to be different. Your expectations are different. So what's really exciting for me is that this isn't a 1 month study or a 2 month study. We're following these people for 6 to 9 months. So we really get to see the evolution of their expectations of their skills changing. And we really get to have a better chance to see, are we actually helping their lives become better? So this is one of the things that I'm, frankly, most proud of I've worked on in my entire career. So thank you all for dealing with me. Any other questions before we move to the audience? So the questions for the audience, please. Gentleman in the back with a nice long beard.
Sorry, couldn't figure out the mic. Ian Kishore from Benetech. Chris, amazing panel and all the work you've done and all of you are doing. At Benetech, we have a similar project we ran in India in which we got 600 phones out to schools for the blind and seen tremendous impact. And my question from our work that I wanted to ask is one around, it's really amazing that you all are getting phones out and learning and how you can improve the phones to make it more applicable for those with disabilities. But particularly when it comes to education settings, content is really, really important. And there are lots of failed experiments in the past of getting technology into the hands of students that didn't work. So I wanted to talk about here how you all are dealing with the content, particularly local content problem. And then the second thing for, I think maybe Pascal is, we were able to get 600 devices donated, but the program's scaling, and now we're looking for tens and thousands of devices. And how do you, how do you actually help create the environment so that those who actually cannot afford these devices, that actually we provide opportunities for them to get devices at bigger scale?
Kathy, do you have any thoughts on content?
Yeah, I would say that we're not doing any content, so that's the short answer. Our research is just to look at what people will do when given the device. It's a very basic first step. And I'll hand over to Pascal for the scale of devices, but I'm sure it'll be more policy side. But one piece of work that we were doing before with GSMA was looking at impacting the mobile network operators and demonstrating that the ability, just like with gender, when a lot of women didn't own mobile phones in emerging markets, the disability market, once people have phones, they've often become power users, especially the deaf community. They're often consuming a lot of data because they do a lot of video calls, right? So there's a market case, and that doesn't answer your question, which is for the people who can't afford them, which is where I will hand over to Pascal.
So that's a great question. It's one that we are also asking ourselves. The phones that are being used in this study, I think the cheapest ones we could find that had the minimum features were about $150 or so, which of course is out of reach for many people in the countries we work with. And so the question obviously is, if we go to scale, how do we change that? How do we incentivize phone companies, manufacturers, to try to develop lower cost phones, but that yet still meet the minimum accessibility criteria. And so there's more work to be done on really trying to set these out to help the manufacturers understand this better, because they may not know exactly what those are. We're also looking at, and we're actually going to do a piece of work on this year, and we'd love to talk to you about it as well separately, looking at different models that exist out there, financing models. Because there are countries that are today covering smartphones as part of the benefit package for people with disabilities. I think in Israel, for example, 50% of the cost is covered. Georgia, I think, has just added smartphones to their essential list of assistive products and are covering that as part of the benefit for people with a disability card. So there are examples out there, and we're trying to gather those and see what might make most sense. I think there's also microfinancing, maybe, or microcredit opportunities to explore to make phones, those phones more accessible. But what we mustn't also forget is that it's not just the device, it's then also the data plan, that recurring monthly costs. And here we're also speaking to the service providers, the Safaricoms of the world, to try and see what might be done from that perspective for people with disabilities. So more work to do.
Yeah, I was just looking at innovative financing models, and I'm thinking, for instance, in the context of Kenya, where we have tax exemption for assistive devices, but you see, mobile phones have never been considered as assistive devices, so they are subjected to tax whether they are being used by persons with disabilities or not. So I think through this research, then now, once the report is out, now we have a role as CSOs to now talk to the government to start considering mobile phones as assistive devices, especially for persons with disabilities, so that they're exempted from tax to bring the cost down. But also at a time when the government's having conversations around having low-cost production by local assembly. So I think that also just to ensure that there are standards, accessibility standards that must be met when this is done to also make these phones more affordable for persons with disabilities.
Thank you, Maxwell. It seems to me that what we've uncovered is a really interesting chain of multiplication by zero. If you need to have a phone that is affordable, if it's not, it doesn't work. You need to have a device that has accessibility features that are understood. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't work. You need to have a data plan that is affordable. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't work. You need to have content that is accessible. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't work. So what we're doing is we're stitching together this story and this opportunity to identify how do you make this a reality. And this is an exciting opportunity. We're still very early, but it feels like we're on the right track. Thank you very much.